time for us to start understanding what federalism is and what it means to our nation. A confederal system, you might think about the Civil War and the Confederates. In a confederal system, there's a very weak central government, and the subunits have almost all the power. In a unitary system, there's one central government that has all the power. Nations like Britain, France, there's just one government in London or Paris, and that is the only real constitutional authority in terms of government. Confederal systems don't really exist too much in the form of nations, though the European Union is basically a very loose confederal system. And a federal system has some shared powers between a central and sub-national government. For us, it's our national government, which we sometimes confusingly call the federal government, and our state governments. In our Constitution, they must share certain powers. So what do you think are some advantages of those different systems? Well, for federalism, spreading the power between the national and sub-national governments gives us some of that republic benefit that we want, something to spread the power around so people don't have too easy a time finding out where to get it all, so they can't get it all in one place. It does allow, unlike unitary systems, the federal system does allow some government to be close to the people. Maybe people in South Carolina are different from people in New York, and some of those governments can adjust laws to be more well suited to their people. It also makes experimentation possible. So all of our 50 states have different kinds of policies for education and welfare, and we can explore and see what different policies can do some research. What do you think might be some disadvantages of these different systems? Well, saying that laws could be different in South Carolina or New York is nice if it adjusts for the people, but maybe there are some rules that should not be relative. Maybe slavery should not be allowed in some states and legal in some and illegal in others. That's a principle that we want to say is not good for everybody. But it's really hard to decide what things we're going to allow to be decided on the local level and be different in the things we're going to decide on a national level that are going to be universal. Also, with state and local interest in the mix here, we can slow down our national plans because you have to deal with state and local politics. Generally, in federal systems, the national or central government slowly and surely expands its power at the expense of the subnational governments, and that's been true for America. The national government and state governments began about the same size, and now our federal government dwarfs state governments. And the coordination between different levels of government can be tough. We find the division of federalism in several constitutional places. Article 1, Section 8. Pull out your Constitution, check out what's in there. In the 18th clause of that Article 1, where you find this language about the national government being able to extend its power when it's necessary and proper, a pretty big foot in the door for expanding the power over time. Article 1, Section 9, take a look at that. The 10th Amendment, which basically tells us if it's not listed in the Constitution as going to the federal government, then those powers should go to the states. Article 1, Section 10, Article 6, Clause 2, which is our famous supremacy clause that says when the national government and state governments have laws that butt heads, the national government's going to be the winner of that battle. Here's an important court case that you read about. We have Maryland wanting to tax a national bank. And this goes all the way to the Supreme Court with Chief Justice John Marshall. The problem is, can a state tax a piece of the federal government? In the end, John Marshall decides no, because the power to tax is the power to destroy. If you could tax the bank, you could tax it at 120% rate, and it could not exist. And we know from the supremacy clause that the national government has to be supreme. So this is one of those important court cases that decides something about federalism for us. Also, there's the issue of whether or not the government could even make the bank to begin with, which, again, the court sides with the federal government, says it is necessary and proper for it to make a bank. Here are some other pieces of our federalism story. The Civil War, though slavery is an important aspect, is really a war about federalism. The South said states should be supreme, and the North said, nope, the national government's going to be supreme. Especially if we come up with something we think should be a principle like slavery, we're going to make you follow it. Money has also been a big part of the federalism story. Mandates are when the national government says you must do something to the states. Sometimes they're funded, sometimes they're not. You can imagine how popular unfunded mandates are with national government representatives, because they get to say, you have to do it, states, but I'm not giving you any money. They get to take credit for doing something without having to come up with the money, which is the hard part. It's obviously very unpopular with the states and has put states at disadvantage year after year. States like grants, though, especially block grants. Block grants are when the federal government says, here's $2 million, do something about poverty. Categorical grants are the kind of grants with strings attached. You can have this $2 million for your highway funds, but you have to make the speed limit 65. We have different ways of thinking about federalism. Dual federalism is what we began with, where the federal government is equal in power to state governments. We started seeing some dents. We had some layer cake where the national government was sort of the top cake layer. We still had some filling, like frosting, and then the states on the bottom, but there was some separation still. It started to mix. And more modern versions of federalism describe it as a picket fence, with the pickets being some kind of policy, say education, welfare, healthcare, and the three boards going across, lateral boards, being at the bottom local, the middle state, at the top federal government. So that within the pickets, all the federal, state, and local level employees all have to work together to make those policies work. Devolution is the theory that the federal government has too much stuff going on and should spin off or devolve some of the powers back to the states. Okay, so that's our bit about federalism, but now we've got to figure out how do we get from the founding era to today. And to do that, we have to understand something about how America changed from being a republic, if you remember, a large commercial republic, to being a democracy that we are today. And remember, the founders thought democracy was a bad word, dangerous, but that's what we've become. And that process is a process of democratization. So we'll continue to defer to the founders and see what they wanted and compare it to what we have today to understand our system better. Some of the ways we grew from a republic to a democracy have to do with simple constitutional additions. Suffrage sounds bad but is good. Suffrage is voting. We have a number of constitutional amendments, the 15th, the 17th, the 19th, where we give African Americans the right to vote, we give women the right to vote, we set the voting age. We have political parties, and we have the way in which we elect senators. Originally, only the House of Representatives was directly elected by the people. Part of that plan from the founders to put a republic in between you and power. You didn't vote for senators and you didn't vote for the president, but you did vote for the House. Well, eventually we changed that so that you vote directly for the Senate as well, and much later, direct election of the president. But we still have the Electoral College as a remnant of that indirect election of the president. We also have some historical changes in our nation that helped us democratize. We have a whole slew of new states on the frontier in the early 1800s, and life on the frontier is hard. Families have to stick together. There's a very egalitarian spirit that becomes part of the American way. We've got Andrew Jackson, which is a really important figure for democratization in America. His view of human nature sort of switched the founders' view of it being self-interested, but we could maybe control it. And Jackson's the first guy that starts doing what every president since him has done in saying, no, you Americans, you're good, and you're corrupted by other things like the bank or the economy or some new ideas, that you are good, hard-working Americans. It's a very different way of thinking about people and how to control them than the founders had. So Jackson in his era really dominated politics. He was a very democratizing force, representing popular ideas of the masses, the agrarian or farming interests, the struggle of these new frontier states, the changing nature of our government, and the new professional politicians that were emerging. So again, this whole era is an interesting historical era that we is hard to pin down in real detailed fashion, and we have several scholars and historians that call it sort of an era of persuasion, meaning sort of a feel to it, a very democratic feel. And we see a lot of restoration themes that become really common in American politics. If you want to do something new, talk about it like it's something old. Say you want to make healthcare new. We need to change healthcare to get back to the values of good old-fashioned America. That's what I call restoration themes, and we see that begin with Jacksonianism. And there's this characterization of Americans as venturous conservatives, that we're willing to try new things, but it better be grounded in something tried and true. The two-party system is a big piece of how we democratize as well, because it really links citizens to government. It draws people in past that republic barrier that the founders put in place and connects people more simply and easily to government. You don't really have to know all of what government does. You just know you're an R or a D. You're a Democrat. You're a Republican. Lincoln is a really important figure in our story of democratization as well. If you know the Gettysburg Address, it begins 407 years ago, which, if you don't know, a score is 20 years, so that's 87 years. And if you want to do the math, he's just doing the math back to 1776 to start that out. 407 years ago, our forefathers, blah, 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 blah. A nation founded in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. But that is a switching of what the founders really said, right? We know that our whole system hinges on the nugget of equality, that men are created equal, and then is dedicated to the rights that come after and liberty. But Lincoln switches that on purpose and says we're founded in liberty and dedicated to equality, which is a very democratic idea, that we're dedicated to equality somehow. The Civil War defeats states' rights in a real sense, and the nation as a government is put in charge as the supreme power. We also have a whole bunch of stuff that happens in the 1900s. I don't have time to go into all these things, but immigration, big piece of democratization. Our economic growth and diversification, a lot of important Supreme Court decisions, civil rights, feminist movement, all these things are pieces of the story of how we go from a stuffy republic to a crazy democracy that we are today.